Welcome to the Ipsos end-of-year review for 2023, where we review the key changes and topics that have dominated British public opinion over the year. To the casual observer, 2023 might be considered a peaceful year. We have only had one Prime Minister rather than three. Price inflation has slowly started to ebb away, and we have, so far, managed to avoid any major global pandemics. But it has not been an easy year. Prices do remain high, and the rapid increase in interest rates that we have seen has made day-to-day life much more difficult for many in Britain. We know 6 in 10 parents are concerned about being able to afford Christmas presents for their children this year. The economy, it hasn't contracted, but it hasn't really grown either, which we see feeding through to most public perceptions too. The most recent Economic Optimism Index that we conduct has recorded a score of -36. And that means that it is twice as many people who think that the economy and the economic condition of the country is going to get worse rather than improve. Underneath this, our data shows that the pace of change we saw in previous years, it's continuing. And in many ways, 2023 has actually been a tipping point year where long-running changes, which were accelerated throughout the pandemic, they've really come out into the open. First, the tipping point in our politics. It's clear that Rishi Sunak's bubble has burst. Whilst he steadied the ship for the governing Conservatives, there's still a long way for him to go in his mission to revive their fortunes before the next general election. His first anniversary as Prime Minister in October was marred by 2 seismic by-election defeats, one in Mid-Bedfordshire and one in Tamworth. And just a month before, we find he had the lowest favourability rating of his short premiership. Across 2023, Labour have had an average poll lead of around 21 percentage points. That's a gap that if it was repeated at a general election, it would result in a 1997 scale defeat for the Conservatives. Now, Labour have been making great strides. They're now seen as the party with the best policies on a wide range of issues, and they're even level with the Conservatives on that previously long-held Conservative policy area of the economy. But Rishi Sunak's only grain of comfort, perhaps, is that the public are not yet quite sold on his opponent, Keir Starmer, either. They only slightly more agree that Labour is ready to form the next government than disagree, and half still don't really know what Keir stands for. One of the key areas of public concern, which is likely to feature heavily at the next election, is our health service. In July this year, the NHS marked 75 years since its founding, but it has been a broadly unhappy anniversary. Our polling has recorded a falling public satisfaction and unease for some years, but in 2023, we see a tipping point in these perceptions. In our polling with the Health Foundation, we found that just 1/3 of the public feel that the NHS is providing a good service, and that's down 10 points since 2022. It's likely the lowest satisfaction level that we've seen for almost 20 years. In separate work with the NHS Confederation, we found that public support for the founding principles of the NHS, available to all, free at the point of delivery, funded via general taxation, these are rock solid, and 7 in 10 do not think the NHS receives enough funding. We expect the fate of the health service to come centre stage as we head towards the general election at some point next year. We're also beginning to see a tipping point in public views towards climate change and net zero, as the government turns from statements of intent to the hard measures required to make net zero a reality. The public are not retreating from their broadly shared belief that climate action is necessary, but as the costs of the net zero transition unfold against what is a very difficult economic backdrop, we are seeing people start to weigh up the need to act on climate change on the one hand, against some of the more immediate concerns they have on the other. Our latest global trends data shows a lessening of urgency, so the proportion who agree that we are headed for environmental disaster unless we change our habits quickly has fallen 11 points between 2022 and 2023. A plurality, 4 in 10, say the economic costs of the impacts of climate change will be greater than the cost of measures to reduce carbon emissions. But as we have seen from the Uxbridge by-election, which was dominated by discussions of the expansion of a low emission zone in outer London, these measures, they can be emotive and elicit very strong responses. When we polled the public on Rishi Sunak's decision to delay or cancel some emission reducing policies, Amongst those who had heard of them, we find an equal split between those who thought it was a good or a bad idea, becoming a wedge issue amongst the general population. And this argument of implementation, how far, how fast should we move in decarbonisation, is another key topic as we look out to 2024. And as the economy reaches a tipping point, so do attitudes to work. After a few years where employees have led the conversation on where people work, this year saw momentum move slightly more towards employers. And research by our employee research consultancy Ipsos, Carrion and Box revealed that a majority of UK office workers are spending most of their time at their employer's location. 2/3 report spending 3 or more days in the office, including 2 in 5 who are there full time. Overall, 45% of all office employees are working a hybrid pattern, very similar to the 4 in 10 who are fully in the office, and just 7% are completely remote. Yet only half of employees are spending what they consider to be their preferred amount of time in the office. Our research finds that 3 days in the office is the optimal and happy medium, combining the flexibility of remote work with both the collaboration and career development opportunities that an office setting provides, and that is valuable for all employees, not least the youngest generation. And in many ways, hybrid working is a bit of a distraction. The focus should be on a much more broad concept of flexible working, allowing people to integrate their professional and personal lives in a way that works for both employers and employees. And finally, one undeniable tipping point has been the emergence and growth of generative AI. It was only in November 2022 that OpenAI released its GPT 3.5 model, and the pace of development since then has been exponential. Google's search intensity for AI leapt immediately afterwards and has been sustained ever since. Ipsos now has its own AI chatbot, Ipsos Facto, which has been helping us make the most of this revolution. But when it comes to public opinion, our data reveals a careful global balance. Across 31 countries, 54% say products and services that use AI make them excited, and 52% say that it makes them feel nervous. But for the UK, it's clear that there's a more negative reception. 2/3 say AI products and services make them nervous, a score exceeded only by Australia. Just 4 in 10 are excited. English-speaking countries such as the UK, New Zealand, Ireland, Canada stand out as being more nervous than other countries when it comes to AI. Perhaps speaking the same language as the US, they're more familiar with the development and application of these models, in which case they are showing how sentiment might evolve in other parts of the world as their familiarity builds. So here ends our overview of public opinion trends in what may well prove to be a tipping point year. Looking forward, the UK general election looms large for us and for many of our clients. But 2024 will be a pivotal year for democracies worldwide, with elections in India, the US, and to the European Parliament, among others. But it is important to remember that these will be single moments in the wider and longer-term story of the change we are seeing in the UK, Europe, and the world. Finally, I wanted to send a note of positivity, which always seems to be in short supply. Firstly, while public opinion remains strongly negative, we are seeing some signs of a thaw. We can hope that people will feel better as 2024 begins. And it is worth remembering to counter our own pessimistic biases too. We ask most often about the things people are most negative about, like the economy and the state of the world. But underneath this, people remain positive about a whole range of things, including their families, their homes, their friendships, and their hobbies. And this is perhaps where we should focus this festive season.